I'm here in Austin at BitBlockBoom with Senator Cynthia Lummis, a huge advocate for Bitcoin. Senator, thank you so much for joining me on Hard Money.
It's nice to be with you again, Natalie. It's great to see you.
It's so great to see you. I want to ask first, tell me about your Bitcoin journey, because so many of us, we hear about it, we're very skeptical at first. Maybe we think it can be hacked or it could go to zero. And then we start that process of going down the proverbial rabbit hole, learning more and more, and growing in our conviction. So did you have a similar journey where at first you heard about it, you weren't so sure, and then now you're one of the staunchest proponents for regulatory clarity and embracing this asset on a government level?
I did. And because I'm a baby boomer, these things don't tend to come naturally to us, technology-based assets in particular. But the reason I think Bitcoin resonated so much with me is because of the concept of mining. I come from Wyoming, which is a mining and oil and gas state. So conceptually that resonated with me. I also was looking when I was state treasurer of Wyoming for a great store of value, because while we were trying to diversify our investments, we wanted some that produced income in the short term. And then we wanted others that really were focused on holding and growing their long-term value. And so Bitcoin resonated with me because it's such a hard asset. It really is digital gold. It is something that will continue because of its scarcity. There will only be 21 million Bitcoin, never mind. Its scarcity will continue to allow it to hold its value.
At what point did you start appreciating the idea of hard assets and really saving? Because you were state treasurer, but it must have gone back before that.
It did. I come from the commodity industry, the ranching industry. We're invested in land. We're producing grass. And grass is what we market. We market it through the cattle. But we want to nurture and be good stewards of the land because we want it to continue to produce the grass, which produces the cattle, which produces our annual income. So taking good care of the land, being its steward, is an important thing for all generations. And that resonated with me as well in terms of how Bitcoin, if we're good stewards, can also be nurtured and continue to hold its value for the future.
Well, one of the biggest obstacles is just education. And so many people really don't understand it, both on a retail level, on a government level, on an institutional level. What really helped you understand and sort of crystallize for you that not only is this a powerful tool for freedom, savings, human rights even, but that it also maybe can't be stopped?
Well, I love that it can't be stopped. Especially because I'm concerned about our national debt. I'm concerned about inflation. I see people in my home state of Wyoming that are going to food banks now because they need fuel. They need gasoline to get to their jobs. And they have to choose now between high-priced gasoline and food. So they're going to food banks for their food. So when we see things that are inflationary, when we see the value of a dollar drop, when you go to the grocery store and you come out with one sack of food and you used to, for the same price, come out with two, we really need to look at assets that are going to be there for the long term. And that's why, to me, it's actually comforting to know that Bitcoin is there. And so I think as people learn more about it and become comfortable and familiar with an asset that is online, they'll begin to see it as something that that is a backstop. It's behind them, and they'll have it for their long-term savings and long-term future. And I think it's even more important for people who are of modest means. We're seeing it in this country from people who are of modest means, but even more so overseas, where some of the earliest adopters of this wonderful technology are people who live in places where the government is unstable. And they know that their very homes or property is not secure because the government can actually come and take it. And Bitcoin is something the government cannot take. And for people in foreign countries that are living in places that are very insecure, this is definitely a backstop and something that they can comfortably go to bed at night and know it's going to be there in the morning.
Have you taken it upon yourself to sort of orange pill, so to speak, other members of Congress? And what sorts of resources do you point them to?
Well, I definitely am working at that. And so I have not only a lending library, but a giving library in my office. So if members will say, hey, what books do you recommend? I say, I'll be right back, and I'll go get them Layered Money, or the Fiat Standard, or the Bitcoin Standard, or the Bitcoin and the American Dream. There's a lot of wonderful books that I just give to members to read more, or if they want to return them so I can relend, I'll do that too. I also, with Senator Kirsten Sinema of Arizona, created the Financial Innovation Caucus. And we mostly use that caucus to educate Senate staffers for different members, so they can take a deeper dive into teaching their senator about these assets. So we've had some great speakers come in and address them. For example, people from Chainalysis, because so many senators think that this is an asset that's used for fraud and crime. And so when we have people from the companies that are solving crimes using digital assets, it really gives them a comfort level, and they can teach their senators. That's one example. And so we're using every opportunity we can to help members understand.
How challenging is it, and what are some of the setbacks that you're facing, especially with what feels like a very polarized, divided Congress?
Mm-hmm. Well, the good news to me is that cryptocurrency is not partisan. And so I can work with people on this issue with which I have nothing else in common, and do. This is an area where I work with a lot of Democrats who are much more liberal or progressive than I am, but it's such a good way to level that playing field. And so it's a seamless way to develop relationships that can evolve into other pieces of legislation that we can work on.
Where are you facing the most pushback? I understand the Treasury has been a little bit challenging, not as much as the SEC as some might think, and then also some very vocal senators who come out against Bitcoin.
Yes, well, and that is a problem. We continue to face some headwinds with Senator Warren, and she is formidable. So we want to continue to try and break down those barriers. I'm so delighted that we have some great speakers come in that have some different perspectives that they'll share. Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank, for example, has established some relationships in the U.S. Senate that are helping break down barriers, and other people as well. So it takes a lot of us, and not, as you know, Natalie, not all of us learn the same way. So while I was at this conference, BitBlockBoom, I met a team that teaches about Bitcoin through a comedy routine.
Oh, yes.
And I'd love to engage them, because even senators get tired of the boring old read this or take a deep dive into this. Sometimes they just want that lighter conversation that will take them into a deeper interest in this subject matter. So we want to use all the tools available to get to people.
Some prominent voices in the space have said things like, if you really understand Bitcoin, you can't be against it. So do you think that it is just an issue of awareness and education when it comes to some of these political leaders who have come out against Bitcoin? Or do you think there is a sense of people understanding it, but wanting to push back on it for a political reason?
I think more people don't understand it, and as they do understand it, they will become very receptive. However, I think there are some policymakers that are threatened by Bitcoin because they see it as something they cannot control. And so for people who believe government needs to be in control and tell people what to do, Bitcoin is out of their control. And so when they hear that there's something that is being referred to as freedom money, that the government doesn't control and that puts people in power of their own lives, their own savings, their own relationships with each other in terms of the economy, that's scary to some people. So it's both. Fortunately, I believe that the group that wants the power of control over people is smaller than the group that will embrace and be receptive once they understand.
Well, I know so many people appreciate when you say things like Bitcoin is apolitical, it's bipartisan. Maybe it can be the thing that unites us. And I know you're working with Democrat Senator Kirsten Gillibrand on a piece of legislation to bring some more regulatory clarity. Can you update us on the status, maybe some of the challenges and some of the things you're looking forward to, and maybe people can help?
Well, this is a very comprehensive piece of legislation, probably too comprehensive given the time remaining in 2022 for the bill to pass. But what that does is give us more time to get more input on the bill. And we want to embrace that. We want people to provide additional input and ideas and thoughts. So by all means, you can find it on GitHub. You can go look up elements of it that you want to weigh in on. And please do. We encourage people to give us feedback.
And one of the areas that potentially people can give feedback on is just what size of a transaction could be taxed. Is that right?
Yes, there's an amount that is de minimis in the bill. So as the Lightning Network and other opportunities to use it, not just as a store of value, but as a means of exchange, become more mainstream, we want to have an amount that is just not subject to taxation and reporting and disclosure. I think we started the bill at either 600 or 1,000 and tried to take it up from there. Treasury's pushed it down to 50. To me, that's too de minimis. Maybe I was a little ambitious on my side to allow people more freedom with their money. But we are looking for not only what is the right de minimis amount that should be exempt from taxation and disclosure, but why? Why is that the right amount? For example, here at BitBlockBoom, there was a gentleman from Australia who said in Australia, there's a $10,000 de minimis amount that gives them the freedom to be innovative within this space. So having that example that's already a real world example used in another country will help us. So I encourage people who are listening to you and your many listeners to weigh in, help us.
I know Bitcoiners are very vocal. They get out there, they want their politicians, their elected leaders to be well educated in this subject. I want to ask you though, with regards to regulatory clarity and having a real framework, how will that help Bitcoin in a real sense?
Bitcoin will actually benefit by having some of the bad actors regulated, disclosed, and out of the scene. Because for some people, they don't understand the difference between Bitcoin and an altcoin. There are a lot of altcoins that are just fraudulent. They are scams. So they should be under the control and jurisdiction of the SEC, because the SEC really is good at disclosure and consumer protection. So as soon as more of the bad actors can be dismissed, the better it looks for Bitcoin because of its complete decentralization and the qualities that make it digital gold. So regulation is actually good for Bitcoin because among all the cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin is going to emerge as the gold standard.
Is there anything you can share for folks wondering about this Ethereum merge and the potential for a narrative to push for Ethereum being more environmentally friendly over Bitcoin when others are just very concerned about the ultimate centralization and security issues involved with Ethereum from the past?
Well, one of the interesting things that's happening is that while Ethereum has touted the advantages of being a proof of stake as opposed to proof of work, and that means it's environmentally more friendly, and people begin to embrace it, I think that there's very little understanding of how that can affect its more centralized approach. And one of the people who I think really understands that is Gary Gensler, who's the head of the SEC. And his voice on these issues is going to be important within this administration. So I'm pretty confident that the jury's still out with him on Ethereum and where it should fall in terms of a regulatory bucket. And we use this Howey test in our bill, which is a well understood, well defined test to help sort between what is a commodity and what is a security. And the characteristics of Ethereum may change over time as it goes from proof of work to proof of stake. And so I think one of the reasons that Gary Gensler has not weighed in, put his hand on the scale about Ethereum, is that he's probably looking at how this is going to affect its characteristics.
Right. Well, so many changes are happening, not just in the cryptocurrency world, but also at a Federal Reserve macroeconomic level. We're waiting to see, are there going to be more interest rate hikes? Can the markets handle it? Can you just give us a take on the macro environment right now and maybe how Bitcoin fits in with its volatility and its price crash in recent months?
Well, even I have been a little surprised, I would say, that Bitcoin has responded along with other aspects of our economy. I would have expected it to decouple from other aspects of the economy. But now that we're seeing the Federal Reserve attempt to address inflation through the only means it has, which is raising interest rates, we might see things begin to decouple. What I still know is that Bitcoin is a great store of value. And while it is volatile, it may not embrace as quickly the notion of being a means of exchange. But some of the systems that coders are developing to perfect it as a means of exchange can be beta tested during this time when Bitcoin is showing more volatility. So when Bitcoin emerges from this more volatile stage and develops a more sustained hard money characteristic, I think that Lightning Network and the ability to use it as a means of exchange will also become more hardened, more capable, more predictable, and also cheaper and faster. So I see it as a good time for developers of the Lightning Network and developers of using Bitcoin as a means of exchange to develop their processes. So when Bitcoin stabilizes, we're off to its dual purpose, a store of value and a means of exchange.
I know a lot of people would say right now that the Federal Reserve is sort of between a rock and a hard place because of how much debt is in the system. And having the experience that you have being a treasurer right now, I feel like at one point you might have said in a speech that in the past, Federal Reserve chairmen have said, we can continue to push the the buttons and kick the can down the road, and we don't know what that number is yet. We're not there yet, right? What's that quote?
Exactly.
We can keep money printing essentially going further into debt until a certain point, but we don't know what that point is.
Right. So when I was in the U.S. House, Ben Bernanke was Fed chair. And at a public hearing, we said, when is our debt so big that it becomes unsustainable? And his answer was, I don't know, but we're not there yet. And I have heard multiple Federal Reserve chairmen say that. I don't know, but we're not there yet. I fear that we're getting there and that we're getting there fast. But what we don't know is when we get there, the point where we've hit the point of no return, what's on the other side of that point of no return? Nobody really knows. So one of the things that gives me comfort is that the Bitcoin infrastructure is getting stronger and more reliable and hardened. So if we actually hit the point of no return with the US dollar, Bitcoin can underpin it. I very much want the US dollar to remain the Federal Reserve currency, but I think we're being naive if we think we can continue down this path and still expect to be the world's reserve currency. I've heard our dollar, in fact, by Bitcoiners, described as the cleanest shirt in the laundry, the cleanest shirt in the dirty laundry. Yeah. And I think that's true. Yes, we are first among equals when it comes to fiat currencies. But what about our profligate spending? What about the fact that now we're at 130% debt to GDP and have no plan to reverse that? That's a big concern. And so I'm so happy that Bitcoin came along, because it gives us something to fall back on if the absolute worst, heaven forbid, happens.
I know a lot of people ascribe so much hope to Bitcoin. You have said, I think on the Senate floor, thank God for Bitcoin. Are you bullish on America and American elected leaders actually making the right decisions, adopting Bitcoin and legislating it in a way that is fair and allows for more adoption?
That's the approach that Senator Gillibrand and I are taking. Our bill, we believe, allows us to innovate, but still provides a regulatory framework. So we will be resistant to members of the U.S. Senate and House who want to clamp down on it. I tend to subscribe to the point of view that America will do the right thing after they've tried everything else. And I think we're in that phase. We're trying everything else and we're failing, and we will eventually do the right thing. But there are individual leaders in our country right now, I believe, that are bound and determined to do the wrong thing. And we're going to have to get through this. So one of the things that I know and like about Bitcoiners is they really seem to understand fundamental economic principles and value freedom maybe more than other people. And so I hope that these are going to be the leaders of our country going forward. The benefits of individual freedom, being your individual sovereign, is going to be the direction that helps map the future for America. So I encourage Bitcoin advocates who have those fundamentals to get involved in politics. I know that it's a lot to ask, but we need you. We need you now.
Well, it's a powerful message. Just to wrap it up, I know that you come from generations of hardworking ranchers, really salt of the earth Americans. Does that sort of stamina help you when you're up against these heavyweight politicians that are always in the headlines, many of them taking that negative stance against Bitcoin?
Well, it's been so much fun to work with Senator Gillibrand because I have a Wyoming style, which is a little more laid back. And she's very much a New Yorker because even though she came from upstate New York, which is very rural, she has that New York lean in and fight. And so I've seen her push back in ways that are pretty aggressive. And so I'm kind of learning a little bit from her about that. But it's also fun because she'll push back against people in her own party. Whereas, I tend to prefer the soft sell. But I feel so strongly about the fundamentals of Bitcoin that when people attack their fundamentals, I get a little, mother hen about the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Senator Lummis, for joining us. I know that you are working so hard in Washington, and we really appreciate your efforts, especially when it comes to educating Congress on Bitcoin. So thank you so much.
And Natalie, I appreciate your work in this area too. You are a solid, important educator in this field. So, God's blessings to you and your work.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you.
We hope that you enjoyed that interview. Make sure to like and subscribe to the Swan Bitcoin YouTube page so that you don't miss out on any hard money content.